We've got an interesting new idea that came out of the campaign trail last week. We've got an article here from Roll Call. Now, this article was written by David Lehrman, and the title of this article is Trump Floats U.S. Sovereign Wealth Fund as Part of Economic Pitch. Now, I think in the short time since Trump originally floated the idea of a sovereign wealth fund, I've been seeing different articles out there mentioning that President Biden has now also floated the idea. It's rare you see an economic idea be bipartisan. Even if the details of how either side of the aisle would implement something like this might be quite different. I think it's really interesting that both sides seem interested in this idea. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at this article and kind of see what it is that they're talking about here. So, former President Trump, in a speech to business leaders on Thursday, called for the creation of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund, a giant government owned investment fund to finance great national endeavors. While offering few details, Trump said that the fund would yield a gigantic profit that could, quote unquote, help pay down the national debt, an unmet goal from his 2016 campaign. Sovereign wealth funds are prevalent throughout the industrialized and developing world, with the largest ones residing in oil-rich states like Norway, Saudi Arabia, and other Persian Gulf nations, as well as China, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Why don't we have a wealth fund? Other countries have wealth funds. We have nothing, Trump said during his speech to the Economic Club of New York, adding that the U.S. fund would be financed by tariffs and other intelligent things. So, I've kind of wondered for a while now why the United States hasn't attempted something like this. I think as the world continues to develop and the global economic playing field continues to level out, it would only make sense for the US to invest funds globally, whether that be in Europe or Asia or Africa, in businesses that are in our national interest or even just businesses that could deliver outsized returns. That being said, I think the idea of a sovereign wealth fund doesn't necessarily come without controversy. I know there's been certainly quite a bit of controversy in other national sovereign wealth funds over the years. So to kind of make my point, I actually have another article here. Now, this article it is a couple years old. I think it's from 2018, if I remember correctly. But the article here is titled 1MDB Scandal Explained, a tale of Malaysia's missing billions. So, long story short here, the Malaysian government had started creating their own sovereign wealth funds to kind of, help fund, different organizations, different companies inside and outside of Malaysia, right? Malaysia is not one of the wealthier nations in the world, so the returns from a fund like this would be crucial to funding new development and new growth in the country for the Malaysian people. Well, ultimately, what happened is the money was managed by a guy named Joe Low. Allegedly, right, billions were siphoned out of the fund to, perpetuate Low's lavish lifestyle. And nobody really caught on to it for years. In fact, if you've ever seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio playing the famous Wall Street tycoon Jordan Belfort, that film almost didn't get made. But allegedly, Low personally used some of the funds from this 1MDB National Sovereign Wealth Fund to finance the film. If you look online, there's pictures of him partying with famous U.S. actors and actresses, socialites alike. Right? He was really living the high life off of the money of the Malaysian people. And I bring up this story not to say that having a sovereign wealth fund is a bad idea or that it doesn't work. It has seemingly worked well in other places. It's just that in order for it to work well, there likely needs to be stringent oversight to prevent it from becoming a slush fund for the wealthy or politicians, or even just to fund pet projects for their friends or business associates. Now, all that being said, I'm not naive enough to think that, if the United States had its own sovereign wealth fund, that things like this wouldn't happen. It certainly would. But I would at least hope that if it does, that the value and growth of the fund would go towards directly benefiting the American people, like, as Trump said, right, paying down the national debt. I think that's a worthwhile endeavor for something like a sovereign wealth fund. Let me know in the comments section down below if you've seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, what you thought of the film. I mean, considering what the film was about, I find it almost poetic that the film was, again, allegedly, right, financed using dirty money. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Heading back to the original article here, the article goes on to state, right, according to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute, roughly 100 funds currently manage nearly 13 trillion in assets. This does include a handful of U.S. states, including Alaska, Texas, New Mexico, and others, which have set up their own type of government-run funds, initially financed by oil, gas, and mineral resources. Trump now wants to do the same at the federal level. And again, I think this is really, really, really interesting because, if we've been able to prove out the concept, at least on a state level, right? I don't see how we, couldn't take this idea from the state level and just apply it more broadly at the national level, right? And again, I understand that it would certainly be much more complicated to do this at the national level. But the fact that it's been successful, at least at the state level, tells me that there is an opportunity here for the United States federal government to do something like this. Now, continuing on with the article, right, it's not immediately clear how the fund would be structured or what legislation it would take to get through Congress to set something like this up. Critics were already panning the idea as unworkable sop to wealthy investors shortly after the GOP presidential nominee floated it. Now, again, I'm sure that part of that is, just partisan politics, right? I think as we continue to read on here, it's hard to think of anything more open to corruption than the Donald J. Trump Sovereign Wealth Fund would likely hand over trillions to be managed by cronies charging outrageous fees while steering billions of dollars of investment to himself and his family. Brendan Duke, Senior Director for Economic Policy at the left-leaning Center for American Progress, wrote on X, formerly Twitter. And again, I do understand the points that Brendan Duke is trying to make. I mean, ultimately, right, I think it's important to make sure that no president and no politician, right, whether it be on the right side of the aisle or on the left side of the aisle, could, misuse or abuse something like this. I think it's going to be really important to kind of set up those controls up front to make sure that, as it's been pointed out in the article, and as I've said myself, right, that this doesn't become just a slush fund for the wealthy and the well-connected. I think ultimately for this to work, there's going to need to be some kind of agreement as to expected outcomes. I know it's really hard for politicians in the current United States to be able to really agree too much. But if I know one thing they can agree on, it's money. So maybe this is something that can work. Like I said from the beginning, since this article came out, I know that former President Trump had came up with the original idea, right? But President Biden has also called for something similar. So I personally believe this could be a great idea if implemented properly. I think it gives the United States continued exposure to businesses and other markets around the globe, while at the same time, allowing the rest of the world access to American capital, right, to continue to develop new and great ideas that could ultimately be in America's best interest. And since Trump came up with the idea, I wanted to take it from his perspective. But like I said, I know President Biden has since Trump has floated this, has also floated the idea of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. So we'll have to see what happens here. It'll be certainly interesting to see how this all plays out. We'll keep following along with this story to see if this idea actually comes to fruition. But, in the meantime, if you all like this video, certainly please like, share, and subscribe. This is a brand new YouTube channel, so any interaction is super helpful. Really, really appreciated. And we'll see you on the next one. Peace.